Now, good morning, everybody. We are starting today, Be'ezus Hashem, with the help of Hashem, on Daf Chof Amud Aleph. We're in the second chapter of Megilla, Daf 20, Amud Aleph, first Amud. We're holding in the Mishnah about halfway down the page. Okay, so just a little bit of a background to what this Mishnah is coming to teach us. First thing I want to say is that the Mishnah is not exhaustive, which means to say these are not the only mitzvahs that this rule that the Mishnah introduces applies to. There are other things. However, the Gemara will tell us why these things, at least some of them, why they were particularly singled out to be taught in this Mishnah. The Mishnah is coming to teach us with regards to certain mitzvahs, where the mitzvah is to do it by day, that it needs to be done during the daytime and it cannot be done the night prior, even though in Judaism, we know that the night precedes the day, and therefore the beginning really of a 24-hour period starts by night. And you might think that certain things should be able to be done already at the onset of the day, meaning by night. So comes along this Mishnah to tell us that no, one has to wait until sunrise of the day to be able to do the mitzvah. So let's do it inside. Ein koheres ha-Megillah, cannot read the Megillah, loy molin, and you may not circumcise a boy on the 8th day, loy tovlin, and you cannot immerse into a mikvah. Now here it's important to point out that
Rabbi,
yes,
Rabbi, my Mishnah says ein korin with a nun.
Korin, mine too.
Okay, so you're correct. Sorry, ein korin, you're right. Ein korin, you may not read. That's correct. And you cannot immerse yourself into the mikvah. So Rashi tells us that what does it mean you cannot go into the mikvah? Let's do the Rashi together, because it's going to come up as part of the discussion that we will have that Ezra prompted yesterday. Rashi says, what does it mean you cannot immerse, which we're going to explain in a moment in the Mishnah, that it means until sunrise of the 7th day, means when the 7th day arrives for a zav, that's a man who has had an unnatural flow, for which he has to go to the mikvah after 7 days, right? Or on the 7th day, that is. And so too the law is with regarding to someone who has become contaminated by a corpse, means he's become impure because he came into contact with a corpse. Ein oimrim, we do not say. From when it gets dark, from the entering of the 7th, the beginning of the 7th, we do not say that he is eligible to go and immerse. Afal gav, even though the Laila, the night, Tchilas Yom, is the beginning of the day. Hacha, over here, Yom Be'inan, we actually require it to be the daytime. Aval, says Rashi, Misha Avar Yom, once the day has passed, Muta Litbal Balayla, one still is permitted to immerse at night, and the Gemara will teach us all these things where we learn it out from. So that is the view of Rashi, that when the Mishnah says that you do not immerse until the day, it's referring to either a zav, that's somebody who's had an unnatural flow and has to go to the mikvah after counting, right, after counting 7 days. And with regards to somebody who's become impure because of coming into contact with a corpse, that you do not say that you begin from the night. Now, I will say like this. Taisus, right? Taisus comes along and he will argue with Rashi as to what is being referred to over here. I'm going to come back to Taisus in a minute. So continuing on in the Mishnah, V'loi mazin, and we do not sprinkle. Now, this is talking about the process of purifying a person who's become tamei, right? And he needs to have the ashes of the para aduma sprinkled on him. So now, when can you sprinkle these ashes on the person who needs it, who requires it. So we know that there are two times when the person is required to have these ashes sprinkled, on the third day and on the seventh day. However, you cannot sprinkle it on the night going into the third or on the night going into the seventh. It has to be by day. Okay, let's keep going for a minute. And similarly, this law will apply. For a woman who has to wait a day corresponding to the day where she had an unnatural flow, which is no longer in the time period of her being a nida. So after the 7 days, where during the 7 days, right, if she sees blood, she has to wait 7 days, right? But after that time, if she sees blood, she only has to wait 1 day corresponding to that day. So similarly, with regards to her, loy titbo, she cannot immerse herself until Shetonis Achama, till sun has risen, which means to say you have to wait till the daytime of when that eligible day arrives. You cannot start from the night. But Hulon, and with regards to all of them, if you went and immersed yourself, or you did the bris milah, or any of the other things that we mentioned here in this Mishnah, and instead of waiting till sunrise, you did it at the first ray of dawn, so then we say kosher. It is kosher. It is it's a valid immersion, and it's a valid circumcision, and so therefore you fulfilled your obligation. Why? Well, as we'll see, from the Torah perspective, day starts from dawn, but because that is a very unclear time, because it's not yet clear that it's day, so the rabbis came along and said, let us wait till sunrise, where it becomes absolutely clear beyond a shadow of a doubt that it is day, and at that point do the mitzvah. So the Mishnah is telling us, if you did it prior, if you did it after dawn, then you fulfilled your obligation. Okay. Now, before we go any further, okay, I want to share with you the psukim about the para aduma. Okay, now 1 second. Kind of move this out of the way and move this here so I can see it. Okay, here goes. So this is in Parshas Chukas. Okay, so starting from verse 11. Well, this is chapter 19, verse 11. Okay, okay. So now, verse 11, it says, if anyone touching the corpse of a human soul shall become, then he shall become unclean for 7 days. Okay. Now, on the 3rd day and the 7th day, he shall cleanse himself with it. We're talking about with the afer of the paraduman, the bechatos, so that he can become clean. But if he does not sprinkle himself with it on the 3rd day and the 7th day, he shall not become clean. And now, the pasuk goes on to say, whoever touches the corpse of a human soul which dies, and he does not cleanse himself, he has defiled the Mishkan of Hashem, and that soul shall be cut off from Israel. For the sprinkling water was not sprinkled on him, so he remains unclean, and his uncleanliness remains upon him. Now, this is not telling me that if you haven't become clean from Tamei Meis, you've done an Aveira. What we're saying is that if you walk into the Mishkan or the Beis Hamikdash in a state of impurity, then you've done a sin. And because you haven't gone through the process of the cleansing of the paraduma. And the way to do that is you have the 3rd day and then the 7th day that you have to be sprinkled by this. So now it goes on to say this goes till verse 19 that we're going to be reading. Okay. This is the law. If a man
Rabbi,
died, yeah.
Why does it say both expressions? That if he does this, he'll become clean, and if he doesn't do it, he won't become clean.
Because one is a mitzvah asay, and the other is a mitzvah leis asay, and there's a terrible consequence if you don't. One thing is when you fail to observe a positive commandment, but once you go ahead and you transgress a negative commandment, then it takes on an additional seriousness because you've going into the Mishkan in an impure state, and that's forbidden. So one's an assay. This is what you need to do in order to become purified, and this is the consequence of not becoming purified and going into the Mishkan. That would be a terrible thing. So then he continues like this in verse 14. This is the law. If a man dies in a tent, anyone entering the tent and anything in that tent shall be unclean for 7 days. So that means not just the person, but also objects do become unclean. And it goes on to say, any open vessel which has no seal fastened around it becomes unclean. Anyone who touches one slain by the sword or a corpse or a human bone or a grave or in an open field, he shall become unclean for 7 days. They shall take that unclean person, they shall take for that unclean person from the ashes of the burnt purification offering, and it shall be placed in a vessel with spring water. Now, verse 18, very important. A ritually clean person shall take the hyssop and dip it into the water and sprinkle it on the tent, on all the vessels, and on the people who were in it, and on anyone who touched the bone, the slain person, or the corpse, or the grave. Okay? So this is part of the process. You take this hyssop, it's like these herbs, or, it's kind of these leaves, whatever it is, and you take it and you have to immerse it, right, into the living waters, right? And then you sprinkle it on the tent, on the vessels, on the people, etc. Right? Now, verse 19, the ritually clean person shall sprinkle on the unclean person on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. And then it says, and he shall cleanse himself on the 7th, and he shall wash his clothes and bathe in water, and he shall become ritually clean in the evening. Okay? That's the process. So let's review for a moment. A person becomes tamei, right? He comes and he starts to count, and on the 3rd day, the kohen will take this hyssop and he will immerse it in the spring waters and, in the mixture, and he will take it and he will sprinkle it on the person. Then the person will come back and he will, this process will repeat itself, and then he will go to the mikvah. Then the person will go to the mikvah at the end of the 7 days, and he will become pure. All right? Now, here's the thing. There is actually a requirement to go to the mikvah, before you're sprinkled with the hyssop on the 3rd day and on the 7th day. Okay? It's not after, but before, which means to say that there's a going to the mikvah before you have the hazah, and there's a going to the mikvah on the 7th day after. Okay? So far, so good? Okay. Let me take you on a journey.
That. Rabbi, please repeat that.
Okay, so
you're saying that he has to go to the mikveh before he is sprinkled.
That's correct.
On the 3rd day.
That's
and
correct.
Then he has to go to the mikveh after he's sprinkled on the 7th day.
That is correct. That is correct.
Okay, but it says here, okay, he shall wash his clothes and bathe in water.
Yes.
Okay, so they're talking about this on the 7th day. Then he has to wait until the sun goes down. And at that point, he becomes ritually clear.
That's correct. That's correct.
Okay?
Yeah.
But nowhere does it say that he has to go to the mikveh on the 8th day. Or on the night of the 8th day.
I understand that. That's correct. He can go to the mikvah on the day, in the daytime, right? On the 7th day. But let's just go to Maseches Para for a minute, okay? Okay. So this is Mishnah Para, chapter 12. It's the tractate of Para, and it's chapter 12, and it's Mishnah 11. So it says like this: what happens if a person took the azayv, this hyssop, and he dipped it during the day, and he sprinkled it during the day? So then what happens is it's valid, okay? So it seems that the word toval, dipped, doesn't only refer to somebody who goes into the mikvah. The word toval can also be used in the context of taking the hyssop and putting it into the mixture, into the mixture of the mechatos, and that's also considered tevilah. So we're saying if a person dipped the hyssop during the day and he sprinkled the person with it during the day, then it's kosher. Now, if the person dipped it during the day and he sprinkled it at night, or he dipped it at night and he sprinkled it on the following day, then that is invalid. Continues the Mishnah, but the person himself may immerse at night and then sprinkle on the following day, which means to say that when a person needs to first go to the mikvah before he has the meichata sprinkled on him, right? He doesn't have to wait till the daytime to go to the mikvah and then get sprinkled. He can immerse the night before, meaning on the night going into the third, for example, and then be sprinkled on the following day. Why? Because, right, for the sprinkling is not allowed until the sun has risen, meaning to say it's only the sprinkling that you cannot do before sunrise. But going to the mikveh before that, that is permitted. But then he goes on to say, and if any of these was done as early as the rise of dawn, right? Then it's kosher. Then it's kosher. Okay.
Rabbi, could you go back to the original Torah reading, please?
Yeah, right over here. Okay, so we have over here in Pasuk Yudches that part of the process is, right, there's certain things that are clear in Torah Shabbat, certain things we know from Torah Shabbat Peh. When it says over here that you have to take the azoi, which is the hyssop, and you have to immerse it in the water, right? A pure person has to immerse it into the water, and he's to sprinkle it on the oil made and on the people, etc., right? The person going to the mikvah, right, prior, can do so at night. It's only the sprinkling. It's only the sprinkling that has to be done by day. Okay, it's only the sprinkling that has to be done by day. So now, the question we have is with regards to our Mishnah. Let me close this for a minute. Let me stop the share. Let's go back to the Gemara. Okay, our Mishnah, which says that you cannot sprinkle and you cannot immerse and you cannot sprinkle. What is this referring to? Right? What is this referring to? Is this referring to the person, right? Or is this referring to something else? According to Rashi, right, we just read this simply as referring to a person who at the end of the 7 days needs to go to the mikvah, right? He has to wait to the day. He cannot wait till he cannot do it the night before, right? But if you look in the order of the Mishnah says, right, loy tovlin v'loy mazin. Well, what's the order in the pasuk? If we're talking about the human being, the order in the pasuk is, right, that you do not. You sprinkle, and then he goes to the mikvah. And the Mishnah seems to have the order reversed. You have not to immerse and then not to sprinkle, right? So what's going on? To make a long story short, right, Tosfos prefers to understand the Mishnah as saying, when it says do not immerse, it's talking about immersing the hyssop into the mechatos, not the person going into the mikvah. Okay, that's the way he wants to understand. That's the way he prefers to understand the Mishnah. That when we say you should not go to the mikvah before the daytime, it's not talking about the person going to a mikvah. That's not the immersion we're talking about, but rather we're talking about not to immerse the hyssop into the mayim chayim, right, before sprinkling, before it's sunrise. Just like the sprinkling itself cannot be done before the daytime. Okay, that's not the way Rashi learns, but that's the way Tosfos learns. And then, if you understand it in that manner, then there are no questions about what happens if you didn't do it by daytime. If you didn't do it by daytime, the whole thing is invalid because the immersing of the hyssop into the Mayim Chaim has to be done by day. As it says clearly with regards to the sprinkling, it has to be done by day. So too, the immersing of it has to also be done by day. It only becomes, questionable to understand if you say that the immersing refers to the person and not the hyssop. Okay, so I brought down these two views to be able to address Ezra's question about how can one, as Rashi says, right? Rashi says that if you didn't do it during the day, you can still continue to do it the following night. Because the way Rashi understands is that the Mishnah, the halacha is not coming to address whether the mikveh post sprinkling, right, has to be done by day or by night. It's just coming to tell us that the mikveh of the person cannot be done before the sprinkling, right? And so therefore, obviously, it cannot be done the night prior because the sprinkling cannot be done the night prior. But not to tell me that it has to be done by day and not by night. So,
Rabbi, question.
Yes. Yeah.
The second mentioning, we said lot tidbol ad tenetzach hama. You're talking about also the hyssop. Not the person.
Yes.
So both expressions of tevilat, lo tovlin and lo tidbol, both of them deal specifically with the hyssop.
No, the second like titbol is talking about shemeres yom keneged yom. The shemeres yom keneged yom. With regards to that, we say lo titbol. She should not immerse herself before the netzach hama of the day that she's following, that the day that she watched against the first day. In other words, the lo titbol doesn't go on what's previously mentioned in the Mishnah, but rather on it's going on the shemeres yom keneged yom. Okay, that's the zava, the woman who had the unnatural flow. Okay, any questions before we move on?
Rabbi,
yeah,
I think that Azov is vegetation that grows in the water.
Okay, possibly. I'm not sure about that, but maybe.
Yeah, I think that's what Azov is.
Okay. But now let us go back to the Gemara. Now, I just want to say that I'm going to be following Rashi's interpretation and not Tosfos' interpretation, just because it's just easier. It's easier to understand what's going on in the Gemara. We follow that flow. Okay. So we've said in the Mishnah that all these mitzvahs have to be done right during the daytime. Right, the Gemara, we know from where do we know this? From where do we know that the first thing we mentioned was the Megilla, that it has to be read by day after Netzach Hama. How do we know it's by daytime? To Amakra, because it says in the Apostle, V'hayomim ha'eleh niskarim v'nasim, and these days should be remembered and celebrated. So what does this mean? It implies by Yom In, by day, that it may indeed be read during the daytime, but not by night. The Gemara, so are we going to say that this is a refutation of the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Levi? What did he say? Rabbi Shimon Levi said, a person is obligated to read the Megillah at night and to repeat it by day. Right? So now our Mishnah seems to be saying you can only read it by day. And for the Gemara, no, that's not what our Mishnah is trying to say. Our Mishnah is dealing with different mitzvahs that their obligation is during the daytime. So we're talking over here about the daytime reading of the Megillah. We're not talking about the nighttime reading of the Megillah. the nighttime reading of the Megillah should be read by night. But ki katani adiyayim, what is the Mishnah teaching about? It's teaching about the second reading, the reading that needs to be taking place during the day. When is the earliest time to read it? The Mishnah is telling us, ideally, preferably, it has to be read from sunrise and on. Okay, the next thing our Mishnah teaches us, you cannot circumcise the child until when? Until sunrise of the daytime. How do we know this? It says in the Pasuk, and on the 8th day, he shall be circumcised. And since it says day, so from here we know that he has to be circumcised by day. What happens if somebody circumcised a child by night? And I'm not talking about the night prior. I'm talking about the night of the 9th or the 10th or the 11th. What happens then? Is the circumcision a valid circumcision? So there's a machlekes between the poskim whether it's a valid circumcision. Some say that, in fact, if somebody circumcised a person, a child, by night, then the mitzvah hasn't been fulfilled properly, and you have to go back and do what's called hatofas dam bris, which means you extract a drop of blood in order for the sake of the mitzvah. Obviously, the foreskin is no longer there, but because you didn't fulfill the mitzvah properly, where it says so therefore you have to go back and do hatofas dam bris. Other people say that no, for the father to fulfill his mitzvah of circumcising his son at the correct time, right? He has to do it by day. But for the child, once he's circumcised for the sake of the mitzvah, even if it was done by night, then he has had a proper milah performed on him, and he doesn't need to go back and do hatofas dam bris. But that's a machlekes between the poskim. But the bottom line from our Mishnah is that clearly the way to do it is to wait till the day, till the sunrise to do the mitzvah.
Rabbi, question.
Rabbi?
Yep.
I've got a question, Rabbi.
Yep.
We have situations in which a child has bilirubin values that are too high, and you can't do the brit milah.
That's correct.
So can't we use that heter to basically say that, I mean, you said it yourself, that the child is considered to be circumcised. The father hasn't done but in the case of bilirubin, the father can't do it because of the situation. So,
but then the halacha is in that case that he's forbidden to do the milah while the child is not ready to be circumcised, and the next time that becomes available for him to do it, when he does it, he's fulfilling the mitzvah properly. But the thing is, even at that time, it has to be done by day, not by night.
Okay.
That's all. Okay.
Rabbi, I wanted to say, why would the Moel agree to do it at night?
Who knows? He's got a plane to catch in the morning. Who knows? I mean, I'm sure.
No, but he knows it's not kosher.
So we're talking about, let's say, somebody who didn't know it. Somebody went to
A Moel that doesn't know?
He went to school, right? And that day, he wasn't feeling well. He didn't come to shir. So he had to catch up, but he forgot to catch up. And somehow, when he got tested, they forgot to ask him that question, so he didn't know. I mean, there are.
I can give you an example.
Okay.
They decide that they want to do it in the afternoon, early evening, while it's still daylight, and something happens and everything gets delayed, and the moil starts doing it, and it becomes night. That's a possibility. Things like that.
Rabbi, also the possibility of clotting. If the baby's still taking anticoagulants, they might want to do it, as soon as possible, or to prevent too much bleeding. Right.
So whatever the case might be, right? It might be that it might come out the scenario where he's going to do it by night, and the thing is, it's not okay to do it by night. You need to do it by day. Okay, the next ruling, we said, we do not immerse or sprinkle during the night. It has to be by day. Okay, you cannot do it going into the night, meaning the night going into the day. You have to wait till sunrise. How do we know this? It says in the pasuk, "Vehi zahator al hatomei," etc. It says that the pure person shall sprinkle on the contaminated. And what does it conclude the pasuk? By Yom Hashvi, on the seventh day. So that tells me it has to be. It's teaching me that the sprinkling has to occur on the day and not at night. But iskish, and we compare the immersion to the sprinkling. Now, you can either understand this as Rashi did or as Tosfos did. If you follow Rashi, then it's talking about the tefillah of the person. And we're saying that just like the hazoya cannot be done before the day, so to the mikvah cannot be done before the day. If you understand it like Tosfos, we're saying just like the sprinkling of the hyssop on the person with the mechatas cannot be done by night, it has to be done by day. So too, the immersing of the hyssop has to be done by day and not by night. Okay, moving on. Similarly, when it comes to a woman who watches a day corresponding to a day, she may not immerse herself until the sun has risen. So now, here's the thing. The reason I said that I prefer to follow the interpretation of Rashi is because of the question of the Gemara. Frag the Gemara Pshita. Isn't this obvious? Why should a woman who watches a day corresponding to a day differ from all the others who are obligated to immerse themselves, regarding which the Mishnah said that what? That they have to wait until the day. They cannot do it the night before. So now, if you're going to come along and say that, like Tosfos says, that is talking about the immersion of the hyssop into the mechatos, so we're talking about two different things. We're talking about the hyssop, and here we're talking about a woman, shemeres yom keneged yom, is talking about a human being going to the mikveh. It's a whole different ballgame. But if you understand the way Rashi understands, then the question of the Gemara makes sense. That we said already that if you're going to the mikvah, right? What is it? What's the lashon of the Mishnah? The Mishnah is v'lo tovlin. So why isn't the shemeres yom included in the v'lo tovlin? Right? So that's the question of the Gemara. Why did we need to come back specifically to tell me the law with regards to a shemeres yom keneged yom, that she needs to wait until sunrise in order to go to the mikvah? So in order to understand this, the Gemara tells us the following. Yitzchok, we need this. You might have thought that teve kiriya rishona shel. Okay, now let's pause for a minute and let me explain the following. You have a zav and you have a zava. The zav is the male form of the zava, both of which are having what's called an unnatural flow. What does that mean? A man who emits semen, right? So that requires for him to go to the mikvah. However, to go to the mikvah, you can go on the very same day that you have this flow, right? As soon as you see that the semen has come out from you, you can go straight to the mikvah on the same day. A zav, right? When it comes to the first time he has this unnatural flow, which means the first instance of it, he can go straight to the mikvah like a Baal Keri, like somebody who sees that he had that he had a flow of semen that come out of him. What happens if a zav has two occurrences of this? So now he's no longer like a Baal Keri. Now he has to wait. Okay, now he has to wait. Now, with a zava, when it comes to a zava, even the first occurrence of the unnatural flow of blood, she cannot go to the mikveh straight away like the Baal Keri or like the zav on the first sighting. She has to wait one day corresponding to another day in order to be able to go to the mikvah. So now, had the Mishnah not said specifically about the Shemeres Yom Keneged Yom, right? Which means if she only had one sighting, she has to wait a day. I might have thought that perhaps she would be like she might be like the Zav, and since she might be like the Zav, I might say she could go straight to the mikvah. But there's a specific ruling that teaches me that she cannot, because she has to wait. She has to count. So I might think, okay, she cannot go to the mikvah on the same day. However, she can wait just a little bit of the next day and then go to the mikvah. Maybe then she could go to the mikvah on the night leading into the next day, because now she's waited a little bit already. So she's not going to be like the Baal Keri or like the Zav who saw only one time. She will be different in that she couldn't go the same day. She has to wait to the next day. But how much of the next day? Maybe she could just wait a little bit by night and then go to the mikvah. Therefore, the Mishnah came along to teach us and tell us explicitly that no, she cannot go until sunrise of the next morning. Even though the beginning of the night could be considered as a little bit of waiting and counting, nevertheless, you cannot go until it's the next day. Let's do that inside. That's what the Gemara is about to say, but let's do it inside. We'll read it inside. So, that it might have entered your mind to say that her case should be the same as the first sighting of a Zav, that's the male who has an unnatural flow. And we know that the first sighting of a Zav is compared to one who has a seminal discharge. Like it says in the Pasuk. This is in Vayikra, chapter 15, it says over there, Zois Teres Hazav. This is the teaching or the law of the Zav, and right next to it it puts, and the same is true for whoever issued a seminal discharge. What does the putting these two together teach me? Teaches me that Ma Bal Keri Teva Bayayim, just like the person who experienced a seminal discharge immerses himself on the same day as the discharge, because there's no requirement for him to count any clean days. Hainami, so too the Zav Hainami Litva b'Yomei. So this Zav also may immerse himself on the very same day that he experiences this discharge. So now, but in this case, the case of the woman who is a Zava, even if it's the first time, it's not that she had two unnatural flows. She only has one unnatural flow, right? On the first day after. Mama loimatzi tavla. This woman who has to have a day corresponding to the day, and she cannot go to the mikvah on the same day. How do we know this? We know this. It says in the pasuk, "Kol yemei zayva kemishkav nidasa yiyela." That with regards to a zava who's only watching one day against another, it says that throughout all the days of her flow, right, it will be to her as like the time of the nida. It's talking about what she lies on, like the couch. It will be like the time of the nida. And what does that teach me? That teaches me that just like a nida has some kind of counting before she can go to the mikvah, so too this zava has some counting that she needs to do before she can go to the mikvah, which teaches me that she's not like the zav who can go on the same day, just like the Baal Keri, the one who has a seminal discharge, that he can go on the very same day that he experiences that. However, you might think that although we know that this woman has to do some counting, however, people might think that on the night following the day of which she had this flow, she can then be able to have some form of partial waiting and watching, right? So there'll be some kind of sphira, there'll be some kind of counting, even though it's for a short amount. And so I can think that maybe she can go to the mikvah and she doesn't have to wait till the morning. Kamash Malon comes along our Mishnah to tell us explicitly and specifically about her, given the boy sphira, that since she needs to count for a day, so sphira b'yamamahi, it has to be performed. It has to be performed during the day, meaning even though we're not going to require her to wait a complete 24 hours to watch again, after she has a thing, which means after she has her flow, it can be. In other words, she can go to the mikveh during the day, but there has to be at least some counting during the day. The counting doesn't count for if she counted a little bit by night. So therefore, that's why the Mishnah came along to tell me explicitly about her, different from all the other cases of having to go to the mikvah, right? That it needs to be by day and not by night. Okay.
Rabbi,
yeah.
Isn't there a difference between the man and the woman because the woman has blood emission, the man does not have blood emission?
It's true, but there are two stages that the Torah talks about with regards to the blood flow of a woman.
I understand it's the normal time and not the normal time.
That's correct.
But it's still a difference that she has the emission of blood and he does a different emission. Maybe that's why she has to wait a day.
Okay. I mean, the Torah just tells us that that she has to count, and we learn this from comparing her to a nida, because the pasuk equates her to a nida in a certain sense. Although the laws are not exactly the same, because she doesn't have to wait 7 days, but she has at least some form of practice that she needs to do that is similar to the nida, and that is counting a little bit, and the counting has to be performed at least a little bit by day, and only after that she can go to the mikvah. Okay. Moving on, the Mishnah says that what? That in all the cases that we said you have to wait till sunrise, if you did the mitzvah after Amud HaShacha, which according to most poskim is about 72 minutes before sunrise, right? Then it is valid. Frankly, from where are these things known? In other words, from where does the pasuk imply that the day actually begins after dawn, right? Meaning to say, we are clarifying in the Mishnah that when it comes to performing a mitzvah, the mitzvah mid'oraisa is during the day. But when does the day start from the Torah's perspective? That we're saying that the day starts from Amud HaShacha, from dawn. So the question is, how do we know that according to the Torah, it starts from Amud HaShacha? Yes, the rabbis come along later and say, wait till sunrise to be sure, but it seems that from the Torah perspective, the day starts from the dawn. And how do we know this?
Rabbi,
yeah.
There's 72 minutes when a person is not toiveling for any of these reasons, but he's toiveling like a daily toiveling before davening. Is that the same thing, that if it's before the 72 minutes, it's not preparing himself for the day for toiveling?
No connection. No connection. If a person gets up in the morning and wants to start his day and start serving Hashem, then from that point on, it's considered that you're going to the mikveh for that day. You're purifying yourself and you're starting to serve Hashem from that point in time, and that's okay. That's totally valid. Again, you're referring to Tfilas Ezra anyway, so there's no biblical requirement to go to the mikvah. It's to draw upon yourself additional tahara. So that's okay.
Okay, thanks.
No problem. From where do we know these things? Rava says, it says in the pasuk, Vayikra Elokim La'or Yom, that Hashem called the light day. Now, what does it mean, La'or? The pasuk could have said, and God called day. He called light day. What does it mean? He called to the light day. So the Gemara interprets the word la'ar, to the day. Light Lameir uba kroyim. He called the advancing light day, which means that it means before it even appears on the horizon, right? He already called it day because the light is advancing up, which that refers to the Amud HaShacha, the dawn that begins. Frank the Gemara, you're going to learn it out from that pasuk. That's the problem, because you're going to have to reinterpret the way you understand the nighttime. Ela ma'ata, according to this explanation, when you say lo or yoim means to the advancing light, he called it day. So then what about the end? The end of the verse says, and the darkness he called night. So are you going to come along and say that that he called the advancing of the darkness night? That's going to mean that once the sun sets, right, this is already the advancing of the night, and you're going to start telling me that the night already begins from sunset. It has already been established the lav lailahu, until the stars come out, it's not night. So therefore, your drasha is problematic, because you can't have it both ways. If you're going to say la'or means to the advancing of light, then v'la is going to have to also be to the advancing of the darkness of night. And we know that that's not the case. We know you have to wait till the 3 stars come out in order for it to be night. So therefore, the Gemara rejects that proof. So we have to bring a different proof. So Ela Amar Reb Zera, so Reb Zera offers a different source from here. It says when they went back to build the Beis Hamikdash, right? It says, and we did the work. And half of them were holding spears. That's to protect from the enemies who didn't want them to rebuild. From the first rays of dawn until the stars come out. And it further states in the next verse, and we spent the night on watch, and then it goes on to say, and the day at work. So we have 2 psukim over here. We have one pasuk, the first pasuk, that tells us that they started their work at dawn, and they ended their work by the appearance of the stars. And then we have the second pasuk that tells us that we spent the night on the watch and the day at work. Frank the Gemara, my va'omer, why is the next pasuk necessary, since the first pasuk tells me clearly that they started work when? At the first ray of dawn. So why does Reb Zera need to bring me the next pasuk, which tells us clearly that that tells me that the night was a watch and the day was work? Didn't you already mention that in the first pasuk? So the Gemara explains and says like this: the chitema. We're trying to warn about this possible thing that you might come along and suggest. The chitema. If you're going to suggest, Misha Allah Amud HaShacha Lav Yamama, that what? That the first rays of dawn is not yet day. Umeki Arva Shimsha Laila, and when the sun sets, it is considered night. The first pasuk says that they went out to work from the time of dawn, and they kept working until the stars came out, right? But when the pasuk mentions the people that began work earlier than the day and remained the later the night, right? These were people who were extra zealous, right? In other words, they weren't. They were doing it. They were getting up before day, and they were going home after night. And day really starts at sunrise, and day ends by sunset. So Toshima, come and learn from this pasuk where it continues to say, "V'hoyolanu halayla mishmar," that we spent the night on the watch, v'hayeh melacha, and the day as work, to tell you that the definition of night is the stars coming out. How do we know that? Because it says during the night we stood guard, and that means they weren't working anymore. And the daytime, what is the definition of day? That is from Amud HaShacha, because the pasuk explicitly says that when were they working? In the day. The day is work. And that's the source from where we learn that whenever we have a mitzvah in the Torah for the day, from a scriptural source, we know that the day starts from dawn and the day ends by Tzeis HaKechavim. Okay. Now that we've mentioned, until
Rabbi,
yeah.
I'm just wondering, is this considered difficult Gemara, or this is considered like your run-of-the-mill in difficulty?
This particular one that we just read now is run of the mill. This is just the typical style of the Gemara to question everything, right? I like to say when people ask me, about what is Talmud, I say I can summarize the whole Talmud in 2 words. The whole Talmud can be summarized and categorized, or whatever the word is, in 2 words. Maybe not. That's the whole Gemara. You say something, maybe not. Who says? How do you know? Prove it, right? That's the whole gist of the flow of the Gemara. You come along and you state something, and I want to know how you know that. How do you know that? So you came along and you said that any mitzvah you do, you should do from sunrise, and that's a rabbinic additional decree. However, if you did it from dawn, it's fine. How do you know that if you did it from dawn, it's fine? How do you know that's what constitutes day? We bring one proof, and we say that proof doesn't work, because you've got to take that and follow it to the logical end. And that would be a problem for the nighttime. So therefore, we reject that position. We pick up and we say a different proof from a story that's recorded in Navi, right? If I'm not mistaken, it's Nehemiah, yeah? This is Nehemiah? Yeah, in the Nehemiah, where Nehemiah comes along and tells us clearly what was day and what was night. And it's assumed that anything that we talk about during the day has the same definition as day and night as described in the book of Nehemiah. And we accept that.
When you were saying about what is the Gemara, what did you say? It's how do you know that? What was the question?
Not. Maybe not.
I was thinking that the 2 words might be what if.
Okay, what if? But what if is more of like a hypothetical. Maybe not means I'm challenging your whole assumption. I'm challenging you to come up and prove your point, because it's called critical thinking. It's basically, if you're going to say something and you don't have solid support for that, then it's as if you've said nothing. What happens is, often in life, we hear things from people and we say, until we have anything to prove them wrong, we have to accept that they're right. That's not the premise of the Gemara. The premise of the Gemara is, what you're saying has absolutely no validity until you prove yourself, until you show me where you get this from. And that's it. And even when you do bring a proof, I need to make sure that your proof is solid. And if it's not solid, then I'll say, maybe not. Maybe that proof itself is no good. Anyway.
Minahanin mile.
Minahanim, exactly. For when you know this, exactly. Where are these words from? Where are you getting this from? Okay, that's all the bottom.
The other one is minalan.
Oh, minalan, right? Where do you have it? Where do you have this? Okay, moving on to the next Mishnah. Until now, we discussed that the obligations that you have, you need to do by day and not by night, right? When we says you have to do it by day, it means from the beginning of the day. The next Mishnah deals with, well, how long into the day is it still valid to do these particular mitzvahs? Says the Mishnah, Kol hayem kosher likriyas ha-Megillah. The entire day is valid for reading the Megillah. So long as it's still day, you can read the Megillah. The likriyas Hallel, and so too the entire day is valid for reading Hallel, the litkiyas shofar, and for the blowing of the shofar, the natilas lulav, and for taking the lulav. And for reciting the Musaf prayer, and to bring up the Musaf sacrifices, haporim, and for the confession recited with the offerings of the bull, where if a community had transgressed based on following the ruling of a Sanhedrin, then and it was a mistake, then they would have to bring a bull or a Kohen Gadol who issued a ruling and followed his own ruling. He would have to bring up this special par. He would have to bring up this bull. So over this bull had to be the process of making confession. You could do that for the entire duration of the day. In other words, you have the whole day to do that if you need to. And likewise, the confession were recited with regards to the Meiser. So this is when a person would bring the Meiser. There was a declaration where he had to come along and say that he's fulfilled his obligation by separating the Meiser. So that can also be done at any time during the day. And for the confession of Yom HaKippurim, that this is referring to the confessions that were recited by the Kohen Gadol over the bull that he offers for his own sin offering, and for over the goat that is sent to Azazel. So this this confession can be done throughout the entire day. Lesmicha, and likewise for leaning his hands on the head of the animal that he was going to sacrifice, right? L'shchita, for slaughtering the sacrifices. L'tnuva, for the waving of the sacrifices. L'hagosha, for bringing the vessel with the meal offering next to the altar. That can also be done so long as it's still day. L'kmitza, for taking the fistful of the meal offering that was done by the kohen. Ulaktara, and for the burning of it on the altar. It can also be done throughout the day. L'mlika, this is a special process done by a kohen where you took the bird offerings, and he would take his thumb and the nail of his thumb, and he would nip the neck of the bird, and that's how they would kill the bird. For the bird offering, Ula Kabbalah, and for receiving the blood of the sacrifices, Ula Hazaya, and for the sprinkling of the blood sacrifices, Ula Ashkaya Saita, and also for the giving of the bitter waters to the Saita, that she should drink from it. It also, though it has to be done by day, it can be done throughout the duration of the day. And for the decapitating of the calf, this is referring to a case where there was unresolved murder case where they find a corpse and they don't know who killed this person. So therefore what they would do is they would measure to which city this is closest to, and then they would come and they would take a calf and they would decapitate the calf. And for the purifying of the Mitzvah, although all of these things need to be done by day, but there's no limit at what point, what portion of the day it has to be. It can be done from the beginning of the day till the end of the day. Now that we've mentioned all the things that can be done by day, says the Mishnah, Kol Halayla, with regards to the mitzvahs that have to be done throughout the night, is kosher l'ktir sa'ima. The entire night is valid for the reaping of the omer. This was something that was done. This was done on the night so that they could offer up the meal offering on the 16th of Nisan. So the night before, they would go and they would cut the omer. They would cut they would do the reaping of this barley. Laktoras chalavim ve'varim, and for the burning of the fats and the limbs of the sacrifice, which was done by night. Says the Mishnah, Zaklal, this is the general rule. Any mitzvah that must be performed by day can be done throughout the day, the whole day. Any mitzvah that must be performed at night may be performed throughout the entire night. And we will stop over here and pick up from here in Yitzchok Hashem tomorrow. Any questions?
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
No problem. Have a wonderful day.
Everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye, Rabbi.